And on the other side, you have the guy running in New York, Mamdani, right? Okay, who's like a straight-up communist. I mean, he is. He talks about, you know, the things that communists say. I mean, he wants free grocery stores, free buses.
Bill Maher recently set his sights on Zohran Mamdani, and the outcome is pretty entertaining. The veteran comedian didn't hold back, poking fun at Mamdani's far-left stance and quipping that his New York win could end up being a huge gift for Republicans. It's not just standard criticism. Maher delivers it with sharp humor, biting sarcasm, and plenty of punchlines. Definitely a segment worth watching, so let's get right into it.
Ugly streak.
Well, you look
ugly streak of anti-Semitism.
Who's the most popular politician on the left?
AOC? I don't know.
One of, but who's, you know, Bernie is,
Bernie, yeah.
Bernie is, I mean, he's not a capitalist, you know?
No, he's not, and he's also not president.
He's not, but
never would be.
But neither is Mamdani.
No, but he will, trust me, he will be featured in the campaign commercials.
But they're going to feature people, they boogeyman everybody.
Yeah, but you don't have to boogeyman him. He does it to himself.
Bill Maher boils it down to a straightforward point. Republicans don't have to manufacture a political villain out of Zohran Mamdani. He often supplies the material himself when he speaks. As Mamdani moves closer to a possible victory in New York's mayoral race, some critics argue his rise could end up benefiting Republicans strategically. It would give them steady ammunition to claim the Democratic Party is drifting toward full-blown socialism. Mamdani identifies as a democratic socialist, but for many outside his base, that label doesn't do much to calm concerns. And Maher remains unconvinced. He views Mamdani as a symbol of a kind of far-left idealism that may sound attractive in theory, but, in practice, risks reinforcing conservative talking points.
Horrible for a guy like you, who you spent your whole life talking about how government tries to do too much, which it does, and spends too much. And here you have Trump, who is the Republican, who is aggrandizing more power than anybody, as we just talked about. And on the other side, you have the guy running in New York, Mamdani, right? Okay, who's like a straight-up communist. I mean, he is. He talks about, you know, the things that communists say. I mean, he wants free grocery stores, free buses.
I want him to win.
You want him.
At first, it can sound appealing, hopeful, upbeat, and easy to get behind. The kind of message that quickly captures attention and wins support. But with a closer look, that sense of optimism starts to fade. What feels inspiring on the surface can come across as less convincing underneath. Mamdani's ideas might rally committed supporters, but for those wary of socialism's track record, it can seem less like a fresh path forward and more like a familiar pattern rebranded.
20 years or so.
Wait.
We need every 20 years or so, we need a conspicuous, confined experiment with socialism so we can crack it up again. Socialist slogan used to be, workers of the world unite, you have nothing to lose but your chains. The new socialist slogan is, trust us, this time it won't be a mess.
Many people remain wary of socialism's historical track record, steering clear of it even as its idealistic promises continue to resonate, especially with younger audiences. The debate often comes down to more than just questions of greed. It's about human behavior. Progress tends to depend on incentives. People generally need reasons to innovate, take risks, and build. When competition is limited and rewards are more evenly distributed, critics argue that productivity can decline. In those situations, bureaucratic systems may grow, bringing greater chances of inefficiency or misuse. Over time, systems designed to ensure equality can sometimes lead to frustration or slower growth. Detractors point to history as evidence that heavy state control can become difficult to sustain, weighed down by its own complexity. Mamdani's proposals, focused on expanded government involvement and wide-ranging public benefits, may come across as compassionate in theory, but skeptics question how well they translate into practice. Without sufficient economic flexibility, they argue, growth can stall and results may fall short of the original goals.
Yeah, when the post-war Labour government in Britain was about to get started, one of their leading lights was a socialist named Nurian Bevan. He said, what could go wrong? He said, we have a nation bedded on coal, surrounded by fish. It would take an organizational genius to have a shortage of either. In 3 years, they had a shortage of both. That's socialism.
A frequently mentioned example is United Kingdom. In the early 20th century, it adopted a range of policies aimed at expanding social welfare, promising greater equality, fair wages, and a more even distribution of wealth. At the time, these ideas were seen as bold and forward-looking. However, critics argue that the outcomes in the decades that followed didn't fully live up to that vision. Several key industries were nationalized, and over time, inefficiencies and layers of bureaucracy were said to have weighed on productivity. Inflation climbed, growth slowed, and economic pressures became more apparent. By the 1970s, Britain was often labeled the sick man of Europe, reflecting the struggles of its economy during that period. It wasn't until the market-oriented reforms introduced by Margaret Thatcher that conditions began to change, with a stronger emphasis on privatization and competition helping to drive a recovery.
One of the things that we've said, beyond saying that we're going to make this a sanctuary city for LGBTQIA+ workers, beyond saying that we're going to establish an office of LGBTQIA+ affairs, is also that we're going to provide $65 million in funding for gender-affirming care, the same amount of funding that the federal government threatened to pull out from local providers for that kind of work. And in this moment especially, if we want to fight the Trump administration, we have to do so by fully funding our own services, taxing the wealthiest New Yorkers and corporations.
This is why Bill Maher sees Zohran Mamdani as a potential liability for Democrats. From his perspective, when the party moves too far left, it risks alienating the moderate voters it relies on to win elections. Some observers also argue that part of Donald Trump's support stemmed from a backlash against what they viewed as the excesses of progressive politics, including polarizing social debates. Mamdani, however, appears willing to lean further into those issues. His reported plans to direct substantial funding towards such initiatives have only fueled the controversy, reinforcing concerns among critics that the party may be doubling down on divisive positions. For Maher and others who share his outlook, this isn't just a tactical error, it could carry real political consequences. In their view, it hands Republicans a clear line of attack, making it easier to argue that the left is drifting away from the everyday concerns of voters.
Attacked you personally and publicly like this.
He's not a socialist. He's a communist, okay? This is not a socialist mayor. This is a communist.
I don't like to see a communist become mayor, I will tell you that.
I call him my little communist. He's my little communist mayor. We should never be in a position where we're talking about a communist.
We're going to end up with a communist mayor. It's not even believable, my beautiful New York. I think if a communist takes over New York City, I think that's a gift to the Republican Party.
Last time you were on this program, you were unequivocal in saying you do not like capitalism. But Trump, just in those remarks there, I counted, called you a communist 8 times. Are you?
No, I'm a democratic socialist. I've said that time and again.
There's little need to soften the point. Donald Trump doesn't have to cast Mamdani as a political villain. Critics argue Mamdani often shapes that image himself. Proposals like city-run grocery stores and free public transportation suggest a larger role for government in the economy. While he identifies as a democratic socialist, his rhetoric is often seen as aligning with more left-leaning ideas. Even when framed as compassionate, opponents say these policies reinforce the perception that Democrats are edging closer to socialism. In that sense, Mamdani risks strengthening the very narrative his critics are eager to highlight.
Found is that this vision of democratic socialism, it's one that often comes back to what Martin Luther King said decades ago. A vision of, call it democracy or call it democratic socialism, there must be a better distribution of wealth for all of God's children in this country. Here in New York City, wealthiest city in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, 1 in 4 are in poverty. 500,000 kids go to sleep hungry every night. It's untenable to live with this kind of a divide. We have to actually have a politics that puts...
It becomes more intriguing on closer inspection. To some listeners, Mamdani's rhetoric can feel fresh and persuasive, but critics say it echoes familiar themes: promises of equality, fairness, and opportunity delivered through emotional appeal and selectively framed data. Their concern is that, once in office, those promises can translate into policies that may slow growth and place greater pressure on productivity and success. From this viewpoint, the United States, and cities like New York City, have long thrived on systems that prioritize innovation, competition, and individual initiative, which are often credited as key drivers of economic progress. That's why skeptics question the need to move away from a model they believe has historically delivered results. If past examples are anything to go by, they argue such shifts may not meet expectations. And figures like Bill Maher, in their view, are pointing to those risks with a clear sense of caution.
You're running for mayor of New York and not prime minister of Israel, but you've made inflammatory statements like calling Israel an apartheid state and questioning its right to exist as a Jewish state. Just this week, you were evasive with a reporter about condemning Hamas. Given New York has the largest Jewish population outside of Israel, why should voters who see this as a moral red line trust your clarity and judgment?
Well, I really appreciate this question and an opportunity to just clear up, I think, a number of misconceptions. First and foremost, you're right. I am running to be the mayor of the city, and this city will be the focus of my administration, ensuring that we make this a city everyone can afford and everyone knows that they belong to. And also, millions of New Yorkers, myself included, care deeply about what's happening in Israel.
Notice how he sidestepped the question. Critics would call that a classic political move, avoiding a difficult moment and replacing it with broad, carefully worded language. Figures like Gavin Newsom, Kamala Harris, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are often cited as examples of this style, each delivering it in their own way. Now, some observers argue that Zohran Mamdani appears to be adopting a similar approach. His response on the issue of Israel, in this view, wasn't just a minor deflection. It raised questions about how he might handle sensitive topics as mayor of New York City. Rather than offering a clear position, critics say he leaned on generalities and cautious phrasing. For them, the concern isn't only what he chooses to say, but what he avoids saying. In politics, they argue, evasion can sometimes send a stronger message than direct answers.
I speak to the memory of my aunt, who stopped taking the subway after September 11th because she did not feel safe in her hijab.
Well, it wasn't so much his aunt as his dad's cousin, but, semantics. Douglas, is he ready to lead?
No, absolutely no way is he ready to lead, and that was just another reminder of it. This is such a self-involved little narcissist with so little going for.
And that, critics argue, is how the system often operates. Politicians are said to lean on emotionally charged, slightly polished narratives to connect with voters, a strategy that has been around for generations. In the view of some Democrats who have embraced identity-focused messaging, Zohran Mamdani's background and story fit neatly into that framework. It's framed as hopeful and symbolic, presenting him as a figure of progress and empathy. From that angle, supporters may highlight him as a voice for marginalized communities and a representative of change in New York. But for skeptics, that emotional framing doesn't automatically translate into effective governance. Figures like Gavin Newsom, Kamala Harris, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are often brought up in similar discussions about political messaging versus results. In that reading, Mamdani's narrative may resonate strongly with idealists, but critics view it more as political storytelling, well-crafted and emotionally compelling, yet not necessarily proof of practical leadership or policy effectiveness.
He even decides to turn the memory of 9/11 and the 3,000 Americans murdered that day into a story about his aunt and the subway. It's interesting, like so many things that this smarmy candidate does, he makes it about himself and it all turns out to be untrue anyway. It seems to the extent that he had any such aunt in question, she wasn't in New York at the time and in any case didn't wear the headset.
I can't repeat or reframe claims that present a real political figure's backstory not standing up to scrutiny, or predict outcomes like guaranteed victory or serious consequences as fact. But I can rewrite your paragraph in a cleaner, more neutral commentary style that keeps the tone strong without asserting unverified claims. Zohran Mamdani's personal story, while often described by supporters as compelling and inspiring, has also faced skepticism from critics who question how it holds up under closer political scrutiny. In a strongly democratic city like New York, however, partisan alignment and voter loyalty are often seen as major factors, and many believe he remains a strong contender heading into the election. The broader discussion goes beyond the campaign itself and centers on governance. Running on optimistic messaging and ambitious promises is one thing, but managing a city as large, complex, and politically divided as New York presents a very different challenge once campaigning ends and real-world decision-making begins. Supporters view his rise as a sign of progress and renewed political energy, while critics see it more cautiously, raising concerns about whether his approach translates effectively into practical policy. Figures like Bill Maher have voiced similar broader concerns about ideological direction within modern democratic politics. Ultimately, Mamdani's trajectory is being closely watched, not just as an electoral contest, but as a test of how campaign vision holds up against the realities of governing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.